Hey there, Bible nerds. Welcome back to Chapters and Chuckles by Kay, where we dive into the Bible chapter by chapter. Today we are walking through Job chapters 11 through 15, and things are getting tense, as they always do. So Eliphaz and Bildad have already argued that suffering is connected to wrongdoings, right? So Job must have done something to deserve this, is what they're thinking. Job has already repeatedly insisted that he's not claiming to be completely sinless, but he's not committed. He has. What am I trying to say? He has not committed some kind of secret, right? Like some like a big offense that explains this level of destruction. He didn't do any of that, but he wants answers from God. So his friends want a confession. Nobody's getting what they want, right? And then the group discussion has officially become the ancient world version of a family group chat that should have been muted 3 chapters ago. Like, seriously, like, anyways. So go ahead and grab your drink, get cozy, and let's dive in. I only have water today. I need to hydrate because it's very hot. So Job chapter 11. So Zophar, the Naamathite, begins by attacking Job's words. He basically asks whether a flood of talking should go unanswered. In Zophar's mind, Job has been babbling, mocking, and presenting himself as morally pure. Zophar does not hear Job's grief as grief, which is interesting because, hello, he literally just lost everything, including all his kids. But Zophar does not think he is really grieving. He actually hears it as arrogance for some reason. And that distinction matters. A hurting person may say things messily, right? When somebody's hurting, they say things they don't mean things, whatever. People go through grief differently. So they may even ask questions that sound uncomfortable. They may repeat themselves because pain is repetitive. Grief does not organize its thoughts into a neat, 3-point sermon with matching fonts and tasteful closing prayer. But Zophar listens to Job's anguish as though he is grading a theology exam. Like, there's no right way to grieve. Or there's no right way to feel any emotions, period. People feel things differently. Then Zophar says he wishes God would speak directly to Job and reveal the secrets of wisdom. Zophar is convinced that if God entered the conversation, God would expose Job immediately. He even claims that God has punished Job less than Job deserves. Like, what? What? He literally lost everything, and you think that is less than what he deserves? Like, what do you think Job has done that he deserves more than what just happened to him? And it's so crazy. This person, Zophar, is Job's friend. Like, it still baffles me how all three of them really are like this, talking to him like this. Like, it does not make sense to me at all. Maybe, it's because that generation during that time, that this was like a long time ago, thousands of years ago. So maybe that's how it was back in the day. Maybe it's the culture. Maybe that's normal to have friends who are like this. I don't know. But anyways, I digress. Job has buried all 10 of his children. He buried them. His livelihood gone. His servants have been killed. His body is covered in painful sores. He is sitting in ashes, scraping himself with broken pottery. And Zophar looks at this human wreckage and says, in effect, honestly, God has gone easy on you. Like, what? Like, sir, please return to the 7 days of silence. Those were your golden years when they didn't speak at all to Job. That was the best thing they did to Job, when they were being quiet for 7 days with him. That's it. Zophar then launches into a speech about the greatness and mystery of God. He asks whether Job can understand the depths of God, reach the limits of the Almighty, climb higher than the heavens, or explore what is deeper than the grave. The answer is no. Um, the God's wisdom is beyond human measurement. His power stretches farther than the earth and wider than the sea. The theology itself is largely true. God is beyond complete human comprehension. God sees deception. God recognizes evil even when people do not. No, because he knows your heart, right? So no human being can place God under investigation as though the creator owes creation a complete technical report. The problem is how Zophar applies those truths. He uses God's greatness as a weapon to silence Job rather than as a reason to approach Job humbly. Zophar assumes that because God knows everything, Zophar must therefore know what God knows about Job. That is an impressive leap. Humanity has always been talented at confusing, like God understands the situation with my personal opinion is now divinely certified. So Zophar also compares a foolish person becoming wise to a wild donkey's colt being born human. The image is intentionally ridiculous. He's saying that empty-headed people do not naturally transform into wise people. And since this insult arrives directly after his lecture to Job, it is not exactly subtle. So Zophar has moved from "you are wrong" to "your chances of becoming wise are biologically impossible." After criticizing Job, Zophar offers him a path to restoration, because that's what they all do. He tells Job to devote his heart to God, stretch out his hands in prayer, put away sin, and remove wickedness from his household. Then Zophar says Job could lift his face without shame. He could stand secure. He would forget his misery as water that has already flowed away. Life would become brighter, hope would return, rest would become safe, and others would seek his favor. It sounds beautiful. It also sounds cruel because it is built on a false accusation. Zophar describes exactly what Job desperately wants: relief, security, restored dignity, peaceful sleep, and hope. But he presents those blessings as being locked behind a confession Job cannot honestly make. Job is being told your suffering can end as soon as you admit to the secret wickedness we have decided you committed. So, Zophar closes by warning that the wicked will lose everything or lose every means of escape. Their hope will fade and their final expectation will be death. Again, the message is aimed directly at Job. Repent and live, or refuse and perish. There's no room for in Zophar's system for innocent suffering, like unexplained suffering, delayed justice, spiritual testing, or mysteries known only to God, apparently. So Zophar teaches us that correct theology can become harmful when it is applied without humility or context or compassion. Saying God is wise is true. Saying therefore I know exactly why God allowed your pain is not true. So when someone is suffering, we do not need to solve them like a puzzle. We need to remember that we are standing beside a person, not presenting evidence against a defendant. Sometimes the most faithful response is not an explanation. Sometimes it's just being there. Sometimes it's your silence. Just be silent. That's it. Anyways, it's kind of aggravating. Fun fact corner, I guess. So Zophar is the third and most aggressive of Job's three friends, to say the least. He speaks only twice in the book. Yeah, only twice. In chapters 11 and then again on chapter 20. So unlike Eliphaz and Bildad, Zophar never gives a third speech. Apparently even the debate itself eventually decided it had heard enough. Like, no more of you, Zophar. Like, you've said too much. Like, you're done. You're done. Anyways, all right, chapter 12. So Job answers Zophar, and his opening is magnificent. He tells the three friends that they must be the people who possess all wisdom, and that wisdom will surely die with them. Translation, like, congratulations, the three smartest people alive have gathered on one pile of ashes, and civilization is doomed when you leave. Job is not merely being funny, his sarcasm exposes their arrogance. They keep speaking to him as though he has never heard basic truths about God. Job reminds them that he also has a mind. He is not inferior to them. Everything they have said is common knowledge, especially at that time. So Job then describes the humiliation of becoming a joke to his friends. He once called on God and received answers. He was once considered righteous and blameless. Now he is mocked. People who are comfortable often treat disaster with contempt, as though suffering proves that the sufferer is careless, foolish, or morally wrong, morally defective, what have you, etc. So Job points out another problem with his friend's formula, quote unquote formula, like robbers can live securely and people who provoke God may appear safe. That reality contradicts the idea that earthly circumstances always reveal a person's spiritual condition. Sometimes wicked people prosper. Sometimes righteous people suffer. Like, there's no equation. Like, either or. Whether you're a good person or you're a bad person, either way happens to you, right? The world does not operate like a vending machine where good behavior immediately produces comfort and bad behavior immediately drops a tragedy into the tray. Job tells his friends to ask the animals, the birds, the earth, and the fish. Creation itself testifies that the hand of God rules life. Every living thing carries evidence of God's power. Just as the mouth tastes food and the ear, hears words, wisdom should examine what is being said rather than accepting it merely because an older person said it confidently. So Job agrees that age can bring wisdom and long life can bring understanding, but ultimately wisdom and power belongs to God. Just because you're older doesn't mean you're wiser than somebody who's younger. That's not always the case. Counsel and understanding are his. If God tears something down, no human being can rebuild it. If he imprisons someone, no one can release him. If he withholds water, drought follows. If he releases water, the land can be overwhelmed. Job then expands the picture. God rules over the deceiver and the deceived. He can lead counselors away, stripped of status. He can make judges look foolish. He can remove the restraints of kings and reduce powerful rulers to vulnerability. He can humble priests, overthrow established leaders, silence trusted advisors. You get my point. God reveals mysteries hidden in darkness. He brings deep shadows into light. He can make nations great and destroy them, right? He can remove the understanding of leaders and leave them wandering through a pathless wasteland. This is not Job denying God's sovereignty. It is Job insisting on it. His friends have reduced God's government to a tidy rule, like that good people prosper, bad people suffer. Therefore, suffering proves guilt. That is a, no. So Job says God's rule is far larger and more complex and more, disruptive than their formula allows. God raises and removes leaders. He changes nations. He exposes hidden things. Job knows God is powerful. His problem is not that he doubts God's control. His problem is that he cannot understand how God is using that control in his life. Like, why him? Right? That is more mature struggle than his friends recognize. So faith does not require us to pretend that life always makes immediate sense. Job's friends want a simple formula because formulas feel safe. Job refuses to shrink God until he fits inside their explanation. We should be careful about judging someone's relationship with God by their visible circumstances. Just because somebody's suffering doesn't mean that they're bad people. Wealth is not automatic proof of faithfulness. Just because somebody is rich doesn't mean that God bless them with abundance and all this, right? It could have came from the devil. So suffering is not automatic proof of secret sin. Only God sees the full story, including the chapters, taking place beyond human sight. Okay, I don't really have a fun fact corner here. So let's move on to chapter 13. Okay. So Job continues speaking. He says his own eyes have seen the kinds of things his friends are describing, and his ears have heard and understood them. He is not less knowledgeable than they are, but instead of arguing with them forever, he wants to speak directly to the Almighty and present his case before God. Then Job tells his friends exactly what he thinks of their counseling skills. He calls them people who smear with lies and describes them as worthless physicians. Like, what are you even here for? Like, you're not helping at all. Like, imagine receiving a customer review that says the diagnosis was fictional, the treatment increased the pain, and the doctors, plural, would have helped more by going 1 star. Right? So Job says he wishes they would become completely silent because silence would be their wisdom. He asks them to listen to his argument, not challenge it. Like, are they willing to speak wickedly in God's defense? Will they use deceit to argue God's case? Will they show partiality toward God as though God needs dishonest attorneys? This is one of Job's strongest accusations. Yeah. So the friends believe they are protecting God's reputation. They fear that if Job is innocent, then God's justice may be questioned. So instead of admitting that they do not understand the situation, they accuse Job more aggressively. Job warns them that God would not approve of their false arguments simply because their arguments sound religious, or it sounds like they're protecting God's authority and all that, right? Or reputation. God does not need anyone to lie for him, for his reputation. Like, he does not need manipulated evidence, exaggerated accusations, or fake certainty. Their memorable saying are like ashes, and their defenses are as fragile as clay. Job asked them to stop talking and let him speak, whatever the consequences. He's willing to risk his life in order to bring his case before God. Then comes one of the most famous statements in the book. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. Job's faith is wounded, confused, and confrontational, but it is still faithful. Like, he believes God may allow him to die, yet he continues turning toward God rather than away from him. He plans to defend his ways before God because he believes that a godless person could not honestly enter God's presence in this way. Job announces that he has prepared his case and believes he will be vindicated. He asks who can bring charges strong enough to silence him. If someone can prove him guilty, he is prepared to stop speaking and die. Then Job directs 2 requests to God. First, he asks God to withdraw the hand that is crushing him. Second, he asks God to remove the terror of his presence. Job wants the conditions of a fair hearing. He cannot argue his case while overwhelmed by pain and fear and everything else. Job asks God to summon him so he can answer or allow Job to speak while God responds. He wants God to show him his offenses and sins. If God has committed, no, if Job has committed the hidden evil his friends keep describing, he wants God to identify it. He asks why God hides his face and treats him like an enemy. Job feels as fragile as a windblown leaf or yeah, he cannot understand why the Almighty would pursue someone so weak. He pictures God recording bitter accusations against him and making him inherit the sins of his youth. He feels that his feet are trapped, his movements are watched again, and every path is marked. So the chapter ends with Job describing human life as someone or something decaying like a rotten object or a garment eaten by moths. His body is deteriorating. His strength is disappearing. He feels as though God is documenting every movement while he falls apart. Job shows us that faith can speak honestly. He does not hide his fear, confusion, anger behind religious language. He brings all of it toward God. And that's what God wants. You should present yourself to him, being vulnerable and raw and honest. Anyways, so at the same time, Job's friends warn us against defending God with claims God never made. We honor God by telling the truth, not by forcing every tragedy into a simple explanation. God is not threatened by our questions, but people can be deeply wounded by our confident guesses. So, okay, fun fact corner. So, this chapter uses the language of medicine and law, right? Job calls his friends worthless doctors, then prepares a legal case and asks God for a hearing, right? I don't know if you noticed though. So these images show that Job wants most an accurate diagnosis and a fair judgment. So far, he has received neither from his friends. Yeah. So, anyways, chapter 14. So Job now turns from his personal case to the condition of humanity in general. Mortals are born into short lives filled with trouble. Human beings bloom like flowers and then wither. They pass like shadows and do not remain. It is not exactly the motivational calendar quote you hang above your desk unless your office theme is brief existence and unavoidable decay. If you're like a morbid person, then that might, be good. You might like that. You might like the humor or appreciate the humor in that. Um Job asks why God would closely examine such fragile creatures and bring them into judgment. Human beings are born from an impure condition and cannot produce perfect purity by their own power. Their days are determined. God knows the number of their months and has set boundaries they cannot cross. Because life is short, Job asks God to look away long enough for a suffering person to experience a little relief, like a hard worker reaching the end of a difficult day. Then Job compares a human being to a tree. A tree has hope. If it is cut down, it may sprout again. Its roots may grow old and its stump may look dead, but the scent of water can awaken it. New shoots can emerge like a young plant, but a person dies. And Job asks, what happens then? Like human strength disappears. Just as water can vanish from a lake and a riverbed can dry up, a person lies down and does not rise within the present order of the world. Job's understanding of the afterlife is incomplete. He is looking into darkness without the fuller revelation that later scripture provides. Still, a small light of hope appears. Job asks God to hide him in the grave until divine anger passes, then appoint a time to remember him. He asks the haunting question, if someone dies, will they live again? Job wonders whether he could wade through his struggle for renewal to come. For a moment, he imagines restoration. God would call, and Job would answer. God would long for the person his hands had made. Instead of watching Job's steps in order to accuse him, God would cover his sin. Job's offenses could be easily, or could be sealed away rather than constantly held against him. This is one of the most tender moments in Job's speech. Beneath the legal arguments and desperate questions is a man who wants his relationship with God back. Job does not merely want his property restored, his body healed. He wants God to look at him with affection again. But then the hope fades. Job observes that mountains erode, rocks are moved, water wears away stone, and floods wash soil away. In the same way, he feels that God destroys human hope. A person is overpowered and sent away. Their appearance changes and they are gone. Their children may receive honor and fall into disgrace, but the dead do not know what has happened. They experience only their own bodily pain and inward grief. Job's thoughts more his thoughts are like, what am I trying to say? His thoughts move like grief often moves. Does that make sense? It kind of makes sense in my head. Anyways, hope rises for a few sentences, then despair pulls it back down. He can imagine being remembered by God, but he cannot hold the image for long. His current suffering is too loud for him to remember, his relationship with God back then, pretty much. Kind of like, when I'll just use a friendship, like if you and your best friends, and then you and your best friend had a falling apart, maybe something happened that's really bad, or your best friend made you so angry that you're not friends anymore. Like you cannot mend, the relationship anymore, and all you have is anger, and you cannot go back anymore. Like you cannot even imagine all the good things anymore because the hurt is just too much. Kind of like that. Does that make sense? Anyway, so yeah, so this chapter reminds us that hope and grief can exist in the same person, sometimes within the same minute. A struggling believer may express confidence in God and then immediately feel afraid again. That does not automatically mean their faith is fake. It means they are human. Job's question about life after death points beyond what he currently sees. Christians read his longing with the knowledge that resurrection hope becomes clearer through Jesus. Job is asking in the dark, but he is asking in the right direction. Ooh, my throat. Okay. All right, so fun fact corner. The tree image that I mentioned earlier, the tree image is one of the chapter's most memorable pictures. A cut tree can appear dead, right, while life remains hidden in its roots. Job sees that possibility in nature and wonders whether God might also call a dead human being back to life, right? He does not yet have a complete answer, but the question itself opens the door toward resurrection hope. And of course, this, happens in the New Testament. That human being back to life, right? Being resurrected back to life. And then eventually Jesus himself. Yeah. All right. Last chapter, chapter 15. This chapter begins the second round of speeches between Job and his friends. Again, I roll my eyes, right? Eliphaz, remember Eliphaz, speaks again, and any gentleness from his first speech has packed a bag and moved to another country. And that's just, just me putting it mildly, because he wasn't really being gentle on the first speech, but Anyways, Eliphaz asks whether a wise person should answer with empty knowledge or fill themselves with the hot east wind. He accuses Job of using useless arguments and words that accomplish nothing. According to Eliphaz, Job is not merely complaining, Job is undermining reverence for God and interfering with proper devotion. He claims that Job's own sin is teaching his mouth what to say. In other words, Job's words are proof of guilt because only a guilty person would speak the way Job speaks. Eliphaz says Job's own mouth condemns him. This argument is dangerously circular. Job is guilty because he protests his guilt, and his protest proves he is guilty. There is no response Job can give that Eliphaz will accept. Just gonna struggle with this person. If I could travel back in time. Oh, Eliphaz, I'm gonna find you. Anyways. Silence would look like confession. Defense looks like arrogance. Questions look like rebellion. Like, there's nothing Job can say. Like, the trial has been designed so the defendant cannot possibly acquit it. Eliphaz mocks Job's confidence. Was Job the first human ever born? Was he present before the hills were formed? Did he listen to God's private counsel? Blah, 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 right? Like, what does Job know that the others do not? The group includes older, gray-haired men, some older than Job's father. So Eliphaz asks whether God's consolation are too small for Job and whether gentle words are not enough. That phrase is almost impressive in its lack of self-awareness. The friends believe they have offered comfort, but their comfort, quote unquote comfort, has repeatedly accused a grieving father of hidden wickedness. They are handing Job a brick and becoming offended that he does not call it a pillow. Eliphaz asks why Job allows his heart to carry him away and why his eyes flash with anger. Why does he turn his spirit against God and pour out such words? Eliphaz returns to the impurity of humanity. No mortal can be perfectly pure before God. Even heavenly beings are not treated as inherently trustworthy, and the heavens are not pure in comparison with God. How much less a corrupt person who drinks evil like water? There is truth here. Human beings are sinful, and no one can claim absolute moral perfection before God, period. But Job has not claimed to be perfectly sinless, period. He has claimed that his suffering is not punishment for the secret crimes his friends have invented. Eliphaz keeps answering a claim Job is not making because it is easier than listening to the claim Job actually made. Eliphaz then appeals to the wisdom passed down by experienced people. He describes what the wise have observed and what the ancestors taught without foreign influence. His message is that tradition supports him. Wicked people suffer throughout their lives. Ruthless people live under constant threat, etc. The wicked expect darkness and fear the sword. They wander in search of food, knowing that darkness is near. Distress and anguish terrify them like a king prepared for battle. Why does this happen? Eliphaz says it is because the wicked shake their fists at God, defy the Almighty, and charge stubbornly against him. They may grow wealthy and physically comfortable, but their cities will become ruins. Their riches will not endure. They will not escape darkness. Flame will wither their growth, and the breath of God will sweep them away. Eliphaz warns against trusting what is worthless, because worthlessness will be their reward. The wicked will be cut off before their time. Their branches will not flourish. They will resemble vines that lose unripe grapes and olive trees that drop blossoms. So he closes by saying that such people conceive trouble, give birth to evil, and produce deception. On the surface, Eliphaz is describing the fate of wicked people in general, but nearly every image points toward Job, right? Terror, darkness, ruin, property, lost wealth, destroyed children. Like all the examples he's using as an quote unquote example, he's just talking about Job. Period. Eliphaz is no longer merely suggesting. Okay. Eliphaz is no longer merely suggesting that Job may have sinned. I don't know why that was hard for me to say. He's painting a portrait of a wicked man using Job's face. The tragedy is that Eliphaz believes he is defending justice. He cannot accept that a righteous person might suffer terribly without a direct line connecting from suffering to a personal sin. So he would rather condemn his friend and be a horrible friend than than reconsider his system. So Eliphaz shows how cruelty can hide inside certainty. He possesses true statements about human sin, God's holiness, and even eventual consequences of evil, but he uses those truths to build a false case against Job. We should examine whether our advice leaves room for mystery, listening, and mercy. When someone's experience does not fit our formula, the formula may be incomplete or may be wrong, right? We do not protect God by accusing people without evidence. We simply misrepresent both God and the person who is hurting. Okay, fun fact corner. So the chapter opens the second cycle of debate, right? And the tone becomes noticeably harsher. It was already harsh then, it's even worse now. Like during the first cycle, the friends mostly imply, that Job might have been guilty of something. That's why he's suffering. Now they're like, you are guilty. That's why you are suffering. Anyways, that's not really fun fact corner. Anyways, so that is where this chapter leaves us. Like Job has just listened to Eliphaz describe him as arrogant, spiritually dangerous, secretly wicked, guilty, 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 guilty. So what will Job do next? Will he finally soften his words? Will he accept their explanation? Will he confess to something he did not? Absolutely not. The next chapter, Job will call these men miserable comforters. Like before, they were called the useless physicians. Now they're miserable comforters. Yeah. So the courtroom is still open. The friends are still talking. Job is still suffering. But a new idea is beginning to emerge. Perhaps the answer is not found in human accusers, but in a heavenly advocate. So, Bible nerds, that's chapters 11 through 15 for us. Yeah. So people can say accurate things about God while being completely wrong about the person sitting in front of them. Zophar knows God is wise, but he assumes that means Job must be hiding sin. No, Anyways, I keep going back to reflections. Okay, we're done with reflections. I just keep saying the same thing over and over. Anyway, so thank you for joining me for another episode of Chapters Chuckles by Kay. Until next time, keep reading, keep asking questions, keep showing compassion, and please remember when your grieving friend is sitting in ashes, that is probably not the ideal moment to debut your 40-minute lecture on why everything is their fault, right? So again, stay curious, stay faithful, and I will see you on the next episode. Peace.